Many students of anthropology, including myself, memorize that Franz Boas is the father of anthropology. He's known for his work in theories of cultural relativism, historical particularism, and more. He also emphasized the importance of ethnographic fieldwork, claiming that in order to truly understand a culture, anthropologists must immerse themselves in the daily lives of the people they were studying. It wasn't until my senior year that I learned about other lesser known contributors to this conversation of culture, namely W.E.B. Du Bois, Emma Goldman, and others, who took alternative approaches to the culture concept. After studying some new perspectives, we began to consider how the ideas of Du Bois and Goldman and others are a part of the conversation of culture. And learning about them really opened up this conversation. So, why did it take so long for me to learn about these other perspectives in a classroom setting? Well, the simple answer is because the work of Boas is considered classic, right? It must be learned first in order to understand ideas of culture that followed. So, in the beginning of our anthropological education, we learn about the classics, like Franz Boas. We learn about the classics because our professors learned about the classics from their professors, and so begins a closed loop of teaching, or rather imparting knowledge. To quote Adia Benton's Reading the Classics, Ideology, Tautology, and Memory, a classic is a classic because it's a classic. The ideas have embedded themselves in anthropological memory, in the memories of anthropologists, touchstones for a common experience, a common body of knowledge. They exert influence but also inspire shame for those who have not had the opportunity or good fortune to have encountered them. Studying the work of Goldman and Du Bois showed me that questions in anthropology are ongoing, and at no point in the conversation should we stop and say, hey, you know what? This guy's right. Let's just stick with that from here on out. Anthropology is, at best, a collaborative project. So, what is collaborative about reiterating the same ideas over and over again? Who decides what the classics are to begin with? And does the conversation end there? The Oxford Dictionary definition of an ethnographer is a person who studies different people and cultures with their customs, habits, and differences. By definition, ethnographers can perpetuate differences between people and cultures simply by defining them. This paints an unrealistic and one-dimensional view of the world, from the perspective of the ethnographer. Early on in the quarter, our professor asked us the following question: what does it mean to think anthropologically? Immediately I thought about how unique and strange anthropology is because it involves humans studying humans. Of course, I thought, anthropologists, ethnographers in particular, just have to take a step back when observing a culture, leave their bias at the door, because bias is the enemy of reliable data. I soon learned that this bias is impossible to avoid as an ethnographer. Our observations of culture are sure to be deeply influenced by intrinsic thought patterns that we may not even realize are biased. In fact, this perspective of taking a step back and seeing from above is problematic. Can any of us really see from above if our thoughts are so heavily influenced by our cultural context? Throughout history, ethnography is full of this all-knowing perspective. Seeing from above assumes that the ethnographer is free from bias and that the observations they make about a culture are reliable. But what is the purpose of seeing from above? Is it to define the culture that we're studying? To categorize a group of people or put them into words that can be easily understood in some scientific paper? This can lead to alienation of groups of people from one another, or othering cultures. In reality, a group of people cannot be so easily defined. How could it be? If we use an analogy, culture can be looked at like a city. Take this map of New York City. It's full of the easily definable aspects of the city: streets, parks, city limits, schools, and public buildings. Sure, this is useful for getting around the city, but it doesn't tell us much about the people who live there. Now, walking through New York City would tell you a lot more. But even this has its limits. If bias is unavoidable as an ethnographer, who better to tell us about a culture than someone who considers themselves part of it? Who better to tell us about New York City than someone who walks its streets every day? Here to the right is a picture of Gil Scott-Heron. He was born in Chicago in 1949 and raised by his mother in the Bronx, New York City. In 1962, he was the first black student at Tigard Junior High School in Tennessee, during a period where they were first integrating black students into so-called white schools in the South. Gil received his master's in creative writing from Johns Hopkins University in 1972 and taught creative writing for years at the University of the District of Columbia. He is perhaps most known for his work as a jazz musician, poet, singer, and author. His work was full of socioeconomic and political themes, and he described the plight of black people in America. Gil's first novel, The Vulture, was published in 1970 and written during a year off from Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. It's a thriller, a murder mystery set in Lower Manhattan, relating the story of the murder of a teenage boy. The book is described as a portrait of Lower Manhattan in the late 60s, and it incorporates themes of drug trafficking, gang violence, and the allure of making quick and easy money. Also released in 1970 is Gil Scott-Heron's first studio album, titled Small Talk at 125th and Lenox. And it's a compilation of live recordings on which track 10 is titled The Vulture. And it's a poem that talks about similar themes as his novel.
This is called The Vulture, and a lot of people think it's a poem, and after they hear me sing it, they're sure it's a poem. But we're gonna take a shot at it anyway. Remember, this is a feel-like thing. Do whatever you feel like. If you feel like clapping your hands, you can do that. Standing in the ruins, ooh, of another black man's life. Or flying through the valley that's separating day and night. I am death, cried the vulture. Yes, for the people of the light. Charon brought his raft and came from a sea that sails on souls. I saw the scavenger departing, whoa, taking warm hearts to the cold. He knew the ghetto was a haven for the meanest creature ever known. In a wilderness of heartbreak, yes, and a desert of despair. Evil's clarion of justice Whoa, shrieks a cry of naked terror. He's taking babies from their mamas and leaving grief beyond compare. You see the vulture coming, and he's flying circles in your mind. There'll be no escaping, for he will follow close behind. Only promise me a battle, yeah, a battle for your soul and mine, your soul and mine. He's taking babies from their mamas, and he's leaving, 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 leaving. Thank you. That's called The Vulture.
Gill's perspective on death and his community was shared in multiple different forms here, through a fictional novel and a poem backed by jazz music. These are examples of how cultural expression can exist in many different forms, and simply restricting what can be considered ethnography to scientific literature can be problematic. Small Talk at 125th and Lenox was released shortly after the moon landing in July of 1969. Track 9 is called Whitey on the Moon, and to directly quote Gill, it concerned that millions and millions of dollars are continually sent into outer space while we continue to face the same problems here on the ground.
We have a poem here. It's called Whitey on the Moon. And it was inspired by some whiteys on the moon. So I want to give credit where credit is due. All right. That's it. A rat done bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon. Her face and arms began to swell, and Whitey's on the moon. I can't pay no doctor bills, but Whitey's on the moon. 10 years from now, I'll be paying still while Whitey's on the moon. You know, the man just upped my rent last night, cause Whitey's on the moon. No hot water, no toilets, no lights, but Whitey's on the moon. I wonder why he's upping me, cause Whitey's on the moon? Well, I was already giving him $50 a week, and now Whitey's on the moon. Taxes taking my whole damn check. The junkies make me a nervous wreck. The price of food is going up. And as if all that crap wasn't enough, a rat done bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon. Her face and arms began to swell, and Whitey's on the moon. Was all that money I made last year for Whitey on the moon? How come I ain't got no money here? Whitey's on the moon. You know, I just about had my fill of Whitey on the moon. I think I'll send these doctor bills, air mail special. to Whitey on the Moon. Thank you.
Through his work, Gil walks us through parts of his experience of being black in America. He also draws on the experience of other people in his community. That sounds like ethnography to me, and it makes a lot more sense than giving the responsibility to some anthropologist with a clipboard and an outside perspective to come take notes on a community. And what's so special about the inclusion of music in this cultural expression is that it conveys feelings that cannot be shared in traditional literature. In this sense, there's no reason that Gil Scott Heron's music shouldn't be included as part of the culture conversation. That includes the perspectives of many other artists around the world, and not just musicians. Perhaps the job of an ethnographer is not to answer questions about a culture, but to ask them. A new anthropology could include voices like that of Gil Scott Heron's in the conversation of culture. A new anthropology could redefine who is considered an anthropologist, or who can contribute to that conversation. After all, the goal of anthropology should not be to study difference, but to make the world a safer place for it.
Jagged jigsaw pieces tossed about the room. I saw my grandma sweeping.